Hello and welcome to the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bercia, Special Assistant to the President for Global Perspectives at the University of Central Florida. Our guest today is Tim Cullen, who directs the negotiation program at Oxford University. Welcome, Mr. Cullen.
Thanks very much, John. Good to be here.
You're here spending a few days with us in Central Florida for a negotiation workshop you're doing for those who live in Central Florida. Tell us a little bit about that, and then we can talk about some other issues.
Well, I came here last year, and I've been to UCF a number of times, but I came here specifically to teach a two-day negotiation program, and we had a very good group of people here in the region of 30 people who were from a mixture of lawyers, business people, and quite prominent people in the community. And for 2 days we did a series of exercises. I taught a sort of framework program on how to negotiate, and taught people to get into issues of decision making and the human being's natural tendency to make bad decisions, so try to sort of make people aware of those so they can avoid their bad decisions. And then we ended up with quite substantial role plays where people got into negotiating on the basis of a role they were assigned, which is completely different to anything they would have in their normal lives. I think people got a lot out of it, and they've been kind enough to ask me back. So I'm going to be teaching that program again here. And so it's an interesting exercise. It's based on the Oxford program on negotiation, which is a 5-day program we do in Oxford, but I'm regularly teaching sort of 2-day versions of it all over the place, all over the world, and this is one place I particularly like to come to do it. Very good audience.
So this is something that those who perhaps didn't have a chance to participate this time will be able to come back to in subsequent years.
Absolutely, that's right. And I think that the people who did do it, I think the word of mouth has been quite good, that people who did it last year have told others about it. And it's not we don't do it for a very large group, but that works very well. And it's I'm hoping it will be a continuous program. I like this link. It's a very nice link for me to come over here and do this.
Well, I have talked to many of the participants in the first session you did, and many of them described it as one of the most useful workshops they had ever participated in. So a little bit of an endorsement there for the program. You're also interested in something that we are very interested in here at the university, which is the issue of small countries and the unique place that they have in the international system. These are countries that are scattered all over the world, but are primarily concentrated in Africa and Indian Ocean area, in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. And they typically have small populations, limited resources, and they seem to be disproportionately affected by so many things, from changes in the environment to crime, to vulnerability to terrorism. You can make an entire list of the problems they have. And typically they're not represented as robustly at international organizations as the larger countries. So tell us about this unique group of nations and why you're interested and what you're trying to do for them.
Well, my starting point is that I actually largely grew up in a very small place. I went to boarding school in the Isle of Man, very small island, 30 miles long, 10 miles wide in the middle of the Irish Sea. It has the world's oldest parliament, oldest continuous parliament. It's a crown dependency of Great Britain, but it's not part of the United Kingdom, so it is an independent, small independent country. So I was very conscious of the challenges of a place like the Isle of Man, which has actually done very well in recent years, and it's a wealthy country. And I worked for much of my career for the World Bank, and coming from a very small place, every so often I would come across the particular challenges that very small countries were experiencing in the Caribbean and the Pacific and other parts of the world. And I always felt that they miss out on opportunities in so many ways. And one of the areas which they miss out on is they don't normally have access to very good training and capacity building. So the people who are having to run these economies of populations of maybe 150,000, 200,000, 1.5 million, but these are very small countries, but they have to have a governmental structure. And they don't have that many people to draw on to run that effectively. And yet, because they're so far away from the major centers of power, training, universities and so on, they often don't actually get the opportunity to really build up their capacity. So I felt that I really wanted, wearing the hats that I wear of having come from the Isle of Man, teaching at Oxford University, an executive education program in negotiation, and also having worked for most of my career for the World Bank, which was an organization that dealt with these things. Putting all those things together, I thought, there's something we can do. And basically what I was able to do was to persuade the government of the Isle of Man to come up with about $1.5 million over 5 years, on the understanding that we'd go out and raise money from other donors that would have an interest in these countries, and then we could offer to 30 people a year from these very small countries, these would be officials in the financial sector, we could offer them the opportunity, all expenses paid, to fly to the Isle of Man, to do a 10-day program in the Isle of Man, then move to Oxford. And I got Oxford University to agree to make this an Oxford University program, and so we were able to bring in professors from Oxford. We've got an outstanding professor for the Kennedy School at Harvard. We've got a number of practitioners. So when we ran the program for the first time last September, we had a ratio of more faculty than we had participants. Now this year, we will actually have 30 participants, and we'll probably have about 20 faculty, which is still a fabulous ratio. And the people who did the program the first time got an enormous amount out of it and have gone home and are implementing change in their communities to make sure that they actually run the financial sector better.
Give us a sense of what is involved, how time-consuming and substantive these sessions are, because they're with you for a fairly long period of time, and they generally work pretty much around the clock.
For 2 weeks.
Except for sleeping, of course.
Yeah, they're there for 2 weeks, and in fact they need to take a bit longer than that, because if you live in Samoa, for example, or Fiji, or Vanuatu, that's a very long way to travel, and so that adds a bit of time. But the first 10 days in the Isle of Man, what we do is we ask them to bring with them a particular challenge which they face doing their work at home, or that their country faces, which they, as rather key senior level people in their governments, may be able to change. They present these challenges on the first day, having already had a session which is talking about how small countries can generate more growth, which is done by a professor from Oxford. Then they present their challenges, and then the next day they hear from somebody who is one of our leading professors at Oxford on change management, and he has a particular expertise in teaching people how to reframe a challenge that they're undergoing at a time of change, so that they can address the challenge more effectively. Then we come back to looking at all their challenges as a group. So if you happen to come from St. Kitts, for example, in the Caribbean, you can actually find out from somebody who comes from the Marshall Islands what their experience was. So there's a lot of cross-fertilization of ideas which they would never normally get, because the Pacific Islanders never normally meet the Caribbean Islanders. So, and then we keep coming back throughout the period that they're with us. Every other day we come back to honing how they address their challenge and how they reframe their challenge. And then they go home at the end with a plan that they will implement when they get home. But interspersed with all of this, we have a big emphasis on financial integrity and stopping the illegal movement of money, because one of the appeals to the international community of our program is that it is responding to the concerns that have been expressed at the G20 and by the Financial Stability Board about very small countries being points of vulnerability in the movement of criminal and terrorist money. So we have a big emphasis on anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism, and on prudent regulation. So on the one hand, we're trying to stop dirty money moving around, but at the same time, we're trying to improve the ability of these officials to regulate their financial sector better, to make sure that you don't have weaknesses in regulating in the banking sector in a small place like that, which could actually have a knock-on effect in a larger number of countries. So it's interspersed with this. And then for the last 4 days, we take them to Oxford, and there we give them a slightly reduced version of the Oxford program on negotiation. So they get a similar program to the one I teach here. And I'm the executive director of the Small Countries Financial Management Centre, which has been set up to do this. But I also actually teach a substantial chunk in that last bit in negotiation.
So how are candidates considered for this program?
Well,
do they self-select, or are they nominated, or?
It's semi-self-selecting. What we ask countries to do, there are about 44 countries that qualify as being sufficiently small. They need to be poor, so their per capita GDP needs to be such that they would be eligible to borrow from the World Bank as a sort of standard. So wealthy small countries wouldn't be eligible. And then we go out to all of them, to their governments, and we say, we'd like you to nominate somebody to participate in this program. We encourage them to nominate up to 3 people from any one country. Because what we're very anxious to make sure we do when we assess the applications when they come in is that we don't find the place getting packed with the president's brother-in-law, etc., those sort of profiles. We don't want people to come there, you know, as a little holiday. And so we need to make sure that we're choosing the right people. So last year we had, the first time we ran the program, we had 105 applications for 30 places. We got it wrong the first year in that we only offered 30 places. And of course, at the last minute, some people couldn't get visas to transit a particular country or something like that. So this time we'll offer a few more places. But basically we want to end up with 30. And we do have a choice. And we're very keen, though, to make sure we get more than one application from any one country. And we don't expect, we expect we'll normally only have one from any one country, because with 44 countries to choose from, as we progress each year, we're doing the program annually. And so we can then, you know, over the years, we'll get a good cross-section of people from all the countries. But this year we know that we've got a nomination from Bhutan, for example. You know, it's just a very small South Asian state, which is quite unusual. As you pointed out in the intro, we have Caribbean, we have roughly 10 from the Caribbean, 10 from the Pacific, and then 10 from Africa and the rest of the world, and that includes the Indian Ocean, Mauritius, Seychelles, the Maldives, and so on. But we had somebody from Montenegro last year, so we do have somebody, you know, there was a European as well.
And these are all individuals who are working in a government financial institution of some kind, or would some of them possibly be working?
No, they're all government.
They're all government.
They're all government, and they are. What we say is that they have to be working for either the finance ministry, the regulatory body, or the central bank. And often the central bank doubles as the regulatory body, and in some places the finance ministry has the regulatory body within it. We like to have an emphasis on the regulatory side, because we feel that the whole issue of money laundering and the global stability that emerges from collaborative regulation, which collaborates with other countries and so on, is so important that we really want to make that the emphasis. So we probably do have more regulator type people and central bank type people involved in regulation than we do finance ministry people. But it's very important to have finance ministry people as well, because they often are calling the shots in the countries, they're allocating resources. We want to make sure those people really understand these regulatory issues, so that they don't say, that's the regulator's problem, it's not my problem. And we do, though, have a couple of days of technical sessions where we get into really down into the detail, the nitty-gritty of regulatory issues for all the people from regulators, and we get into budgeting and public sector management issues for the people who are from the straight finance ministry sector. So they do get, you know, they have a choice for 2 days. Most of it, they're all in the same program together.
Mm-hmm. So what would this be the equivalent of, roughly? Is it like a semester's worth of education, all concentrated in a 2-week period? It sounds like it's incredibly substantive.
It is, and I think that one difficulty we have, particularly with, because I'm out trying to get about $3 million from various governments, international organizations, and we've had some very, very good responses from certain organizations. The World Bank has given us some money, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and I have very advanced negotiations with a couple of major countries, a couple of large organizations. So that's progressing quite well. But one of the things that I sometimes have difficulty convincing people about is that this is not like ordinary, quote, training. I think executive education, as we do it at the business school at Oxford, and as you do it if you go to Harvard Business School or the Kennedy School and places like that, it's very intense, and it's taught in such a way and by people who are particularly skilled at developing case studies and so on, that the participant gets an enormous amount out of it in a very short amount of time. So the 1-week negotiation program that I run at Oxford, we get people writing to us afterwards telling us about the successful negotiations they've done after doing the program. And it's hard to believe that in 1 week you can actually really change the way they do it, but they do. So what we feel in a 2-week program, we are really able to get these people to change what they do. And we've got a very exciting new element that is we're just working on, and that is there's an international body which provides funding to World Bank member countries to pay for quite small-scale financial sector reforms. And while their charter doesn't allow them to give us core funding for the program, what they've said is if your participants, when they're getting ready to leave at the end of your program, have put a plan of action together for financial reform when they get home, they can apply to us and we can give them a grant of $50, $100, $150,000 to actually pay for the costs of implementing the changes they want to make. And that's very exciting for us, because I think with any capacity building program or executive education or training, it's sort of almost you might say the low end of it, one of the big issues is how do you actually make sure that once they get home they don't just forget it all. And so if they've got a plan of action which somebody's going to be funding for them. And the other bit that I'm very excited about is that we're going to, starting next year, we're going to go to each region for about 4 days, 3 or 4 days, Caribbean, Pacific, and Africa, and we're going to invite the people back 6 months, 12 months after they did the program and say, okay, tell us what you've done since you got home. And we'll have a couple of our professors, and we'll also bring in professors who are experts from the region. So we'll bring in an Australian, New Zealander, maybe somebody from the Pacific, in the Pacific one, which we'll do in Fiji, in fact. And then we'll be able to help them make mid-course corrections and really be able to keep. So one of the big emphasis is on making sure that when they go home, they actually use what they learn.
And you're essentially creating a new network of individuals that otherwise might not have found each other, and that network doubles in size based on the original one every year.
That's right. It's interesting. It's been one of the exciting things about it, the sense of community that the people had when they spent these 2 weeks with us, the sense of empowerment, the sense of saying, we often feel that we're badly done by, but we came on this program and we discovered there is a way out of our problems. There is a way, and so we find that they're all communicating with each other. And when they had an earthquake in Samoa, all the participants immediately sent emails to our representative from Samoa, who was the deputy governor of the Central Bank of Samoa, and said, "Are you okay?" And he then shared what his experience had been, what was happening in his country. And I mean, that was just on a personal level, but we've already had people exchanging ideas about a challenge they're facing and so on. So yes, I mean, it's the sense of community and network is terrific.
Now, do you see the possibility of bringing all of the prior graduates from the program together after a 5-year period, maybe for 1 day of a future session? Is that something you've contemplated, and would there be any benefit to bringing all of them together?
I think it's an appealing idea, but the big
costly.
thing is that we're largely using taxpayers' money, because it's foreign aid money, to do this. So we're being extremely careful about all our costs, and trying to keep our, we do spend quite a lot of money on our faculty because they are the best anywhere, and we think the quality thing is so important. But wherever we can, we try to limit costs, and I think that would be a bridge too far to bring people back like that. It's appealing, but I think it would be probably too expensive to.
On the other hand,
feasible.
if you broke it down, instead of having a single large group, if you broke it down by the regions in which they are located, and if you had a partner institution in each of those regions, perhaps you could do something on a regional
Well, in fact,
basis.
you put your finger on what's an important part of it, because in these regional sessions, which we're going to be doing with the one in the Pacific is the IMF's Pacific Technical Assistance, Financial Technical Assistance Center, and we're hoping that we'll line up similar arrangements with the IMF centers in Mauritius and Jamaica. Those sessions, when they come back 6 months, 12 months later, we want them to keep coming back, so that, in fact, you come back 6 months after you've done the program, you may be back there again 18 months, and when you're 18 months into your reform. So then we will be achieving that, and so we will be getting these people together like that, absolutely.
During the long term, what would you say would be some of the biggest benefits of this program to the countries that are participants? If we're talking 15, 20 years from now, if everything works according to as you plan?
Well, one thing is that if there, I like to say that the finance sector of any economy is it's the heart, the lungs, and the circulatory system of any economy. So if you can actually get the finance sector running better, you're actually going to have a tremendous systemic impact throughout the whole economy. These are poor countries with poor people living there. So one result, I hope, will be that we'll be lifting out of poverty a quite large number of people. I mean, they're a large number of countries, not terribly large populations. They range from 50,000 to 2 or 3 million. So the chance of improving the lives of poor people in those countries is one impact. The other impact is that a lot of these countries have the potential to be put on blacklists by the international community because they're not doing a good enough job of stopping the movement of dirty money. And if we can give them the capacity to be enthusiastic about anti-money laundering and things like that, get themselves off blacklists, get themselves so they're not considered pariah states, which some of them are in danger of doing, so that they can then have a more equal relationship with the rest of the world, even though they're very small, that will also be a big benefit. And ultimately, if we give them the confidence to punch above their weight, we give them the confidence to work together as smaller countries. It sounds patronizing to say that, but because I come from a small country, I know what that means, that you often get bullied by the bigger countries. And this, we're hoping, will give them the confidence. And because they do a negotiation bit at the end of it, they actually know how they can actually try to get what they need through sensible negotiations and no longer considering themselves to be victims.
Now, you were starting to say, is there something new that will be a feature of upcoming programs that we haven't seen in the past, or?
I think that the main new thing really is that that we're going to have these follow-up sessions. That's really the key new thing is the follow-up sessions. And something that's very important to donor countries, because as I say, it is foreign aid money, is that we're very fortunate we've managed to secure the services of the former Director General of Operations Evaluation for the World Bank, does independent evaluations of World Bank projects, and he's agreed within the next year to set up an evaluation framework and benchmarks for evaluating the program. So late in 2011, we'll be evaluating the first half of a 5-year series of programs, and then we can turn around to the donors and say, well, these are the results, these are the differences, because we want to make sure that we're going in the right direction. So we don't want to go too far and people turn around and say, well, it was nice that we did such and such a thing in the program, but we don't think it really had a long-term impact. So we want to make sure that things are really working.
Good. Well, we wish you luck with that program, with the negotiation program here at UCF, and I'm sure we'll be having you back to talk further about how all of these are developing. Thank you, Mr. Cullen.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bercia, and we'll see you next time.